So this is the What's New session for the ArcGIS API for JavaScript. I'm Julie Powell, and I'm a product manager for the JavaScript API. And I'm here with Yann. He's one of our lead developers for JavaScript API. And Lloyd.
My name is Lloyd Heberlie, and I'm a product engineer on the team. So I work with Yann and Julie with helping stitch it all together, make a great API for you guys to use.
OK, just a quick overview of what we'll cover. We'll start with the overview of all the latest work on the 3x API. Lloyd will cover that, and then we'll go into 4x API. It's kind of a funny time because if you think about what's new since last Dev Summit, the entire API is new. We released it in May. Its final release was in May. Oh, final sounds wrong. Our production release was in May for the 4x API. So what we've decided to do is kind of take a capabilities overview perspective. So have a look at some of the most important themes throughout the API, programming patterns, primarily focusing on what you can do with API now. Yeah, is that on? And then talk a little bit about our release strategy for the year. And yeah, that's about it. So can I see a quick raise of hands of who has started working with the 4x API? Oh, that's awesome. OK, good. So I think there's going to be something for everyone here, whether you've seen it already or not. We'll cover all the kind of latest things that the team's been working on. All right, so we'll start with 3x with Lloyd.
OK, thanks, Julie. So, as Julie mentioned, we're going to just kind of assume that maybe you've been in hibernation since Dev Summit of last year, and we're going to look at 3.17, 3.18, 3.19, and 3.20, and just sort of touch a little bit about what's happened since then. So, where you can find all this info that we're going to look at here is under the 3x site. And in the guide, the latest is always at the very top here that says what's new. But all of the other stuff, if you're wondering, you're working on a project and you're like, when did they release that? Or when was that feature introduced? We have an archive of all of the previous releases. So that's more or less what we're going to look at today. So one of the first things is a feature brought to the ArcGIS platform, which is the smart mapping temporal. So there was a blog article that went out about that is the what's new and smart mapping. And it covers some different use cases of, if you have time-based data, how would you want to work with that and maybe do some neat visualizations with that. So where you'll see that is in the map viewer and online. And if you go into the change style, which is the button there with the circle, square, and triangle, you'll see that there's a date field here picked, and then the drawing style is that continuous timeline. So moving on, some of the additional things that were brought to the ArcGIS platform were enhancements in the feature table. So there's a few different samples. Under the sample code, if you look under feature table, you can see the different related feature table samples. And specifically, if we look at the attachment sample, you can see if you scroll to the right, there's a property or a field here that says photos and files. And if you click on that, it actually shows you that attachment. So this enhancement came to the ArcGIS Online platform with the map viewer. But in order for that to happen, these features were put into the API. One of the other things that was mentioned this morning in the plenary was the web map specification. Heather Gonzago, who's also a team member, works on the JavaScript API team. She's a product engineer. She worked really hard in helping put this together and bring this to the ArcGIS for Developers website, so that you as developers, maybe you're doing some wacky custom stuff with reading or parsing web maps, or you want to know what these key value pairs mean. All of that documentation is out now on the ArcGIS for Developers website. One of the other features added was the WMS layer. And so pop-ups, being able to just click on that layer and actually get information in a pop-up, that was a new feature that was added. And then, let's see. In the online map viewer, if you're using the directions widget, you get an option to save. And so if you're logged into your organization and you have the appropriate privileges to, like publish or save features, you can actually save that route out from your analysis and save that as a layer. So that was a nice addition. There was a web article that we released. So using the HTML5 geolocation APIs, there was a, starting with Google Chrome version 50, if you weren't using HTTPS, those you would get errors. So what we've done in the API is that if you're accessing the application over HTTP, you won't see the geolocation or the locate button. However, if you are actually accessing that over HTTPS, then the button will actually show up and work. So previously there were just errors that showed up with that not working, and so that was one of the things that caused developers some pain. In 3.18, we've continually over the last year made enhancements to the vector tile base maps as well as the vector tile layer implementation, and one of those things is in RTL or right to left based languages. So not everyone uses English or wants their map using those types of characters. So with the updates that we've made in the base maps and with the vector tile layer, we now actually support these right to left languages that are important for the international community. An additional enhancement to the platform was made for related records. So if your service has the one-to-many or potentially many-to-many relationship, you can now just see that relationship out of the box in the feature table, and you see that in that group by summary column here where it actually shows those related records, and you can just toggle back and forth between those by clicking on that hyperlink. So if you do use the feature table, I would recommend that you look through the list of the what's new enhancements, because the attachments and related records were one of the things, but there was a lot of additional functionality added for events and formatting of what gets shown in the records specifically to control the user experience in the ArcGIS Online platform. One other thing's the WCS layer. So we could toggle this to show, say, only show snow and ice. And as we mouse over the feature there, you can see that information in the pop-up. They mentioned Arcade this morning. Here's some links related to introducing Arcade, blog articles. Christian had written a blog article that covers using arcade expressions in web apps. I would recommend that you would read that once you've become familiar with the other stuff. But this was a big feature added into the platform. And so one of the things is labeling, and the other thing is actually doing rendering. So let's zoom up here. So just by a show of hands, how many of you ever have had to cook your data in order to either render upon a field or do like field calculations to create labeling for a feature? Probably a lot of you are going to raise your hands. So there's multiple issues that come into that. So like also if your data changes a lot, then you have to build in a data management process to keep those fields up to date. Well, that's one of the things that is really powerful about Arcade, is being able to dynamically use fields and do calculations to do rendering or do labeling. So what we're looking at here is some wind velocity data, and sometimes in your data you might have bad data where there's either undefined values or zero values, and using in the expressions you can control what is going to be displayed whenever you you look at those features, or those data values don't have information that you want to show. Another one that Christian is likely to talk about is this weather data, which is apparent temperature, or what feels like. And we're not going to go into a lot of detail here about what's going on in all this code, but you can see that there is this JavaScript block, and then down here at the bottom we're using that text to populate a variable that is then further used along to use a value expression with the visual variables. And this information can either be stored in the web map, or it can be saved into a layer that you save into the platform, either on-premise or on ArcGIS Online. And so that brings us to 320, finally caught up. One of the things that had been mentioned earlier today was the non-Earth measurement, so like measuring on Mars. And so this is something that the measurement widget and the platform just supports now, is if you are, say, like NASA or working with other, planetary bodies that you need to do measurements or have the scale bar work properly, those features were just added last week. We also added in a feature to the directions widget. So let's just say we're going from Redlands to Palm Springs. There's this traffic cone button now, which is a barriers, and you can just draw a line on the map, and then it'll recalculate the route based upon that barrier. So that's just an out-of-the-box thing. Before, you would have programmatically had to do that, so that's a really nice feature enhancement. So as I mentioned before, you can always find the latest release information in the What's New. And then all of the other archived information is in the What's New archive. We've also done some updates to the samples. So we added this, the Explore and the Sandbox has always been there, but we added this Jsbin. And recently we've done some work to update the sandbox. So this, you get a little bit more room here moving this thing back and forth. You can toggle the output. So if you want to do full screen demo with just what's on there or not. And then there's links for Jsbin. So if you open the sandbox make changes in the sandbox and then want to open that in Jsbin to share it to somebody, basically we pass the code that's in the sandbox to Jsbin, and that becomes your new Jsbin. So one of the most important things to mention in this is a great workflow. If you find an issue in the API, that you can post code on GeoNet and post the Jsbin there, or even if you have submit a tech support bug, that you could post a Jsbin link in there, and we can see the code and be able to more easily reproduce what the issue is that you're having. So there's a lot of benefits to this. One of the other things is there's keyboard shortcuts now with this editor that we have. So you might not think this is that big of a deal, but if you use the sandbox much, the keyboard shortcuts can save you a lot of time with just being able to beautify the code if you copy and paste stuff in there, or if you want to quickly comment or uncomment a line, or if you're a Vim junkie, you can turn the sandbox into Vim mode and just use the keyboard only to navigate and update. So how many of you already use Jsbin? Raise of hands. Not that many. Boo! No, I'm just kidding. So Jsbin is a online sandbox, kind of like JS Fiddle and CodePen, and there's a bunch of them out there. But you can sign in with your GitHub account, and you can like clone the sample, which basically copies what you opened and then can save it into your profile. And you can add in different libraries, and I don't know why it's not loading.
Sometimes it doesn't work with HTTPS.
Oh, okay. Okay. No, it's loading now. So I would suggest that you look into using it, especially to communicate with others on the forum, and just it's a nice way to be able to share and report issues between the community with the JavaScript team, because we monitor the GeoNet forums as well, and then also tech support. So just to wrap up, I know that was kind of a whirlwind of stuff. New features, arcade labeling and rendering in 3x, a bunch of feature table enhancements went in to support the map viewer, as well as the API, measurement updates, directions, widget, locate, elevation profile, vector tile layer updates, implementation, and the vector base maps for the right to left languages, web map spec, OGC, and then also a bunch of locales that we added. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Yann.
Yep. Yep. So Lloyd is our product engineer that works really hard on the SDK for us, and all those enhancements like the Jsbin. Also, we are using it every day. Like as soon as I find a bug, it's a good way for me to take one of the samples and then modify it just to showcase the bug, and then I can just copy and paste or share the link with some other teammates. So I will show some of the new things that happen in the 4x API. Like Julie said, like all of it basically is new. So I won't detail everything that is new, but the main feature. So I'm going to start with just going over like the SDK. This is a great achievement from Lloyd. Like all the tooling that builds it, and one of the great things that we added is a quick search for the class or any properties. So if you know about a property, you want to know more, like the size of a symbol. Of course, it's all over the place. But if I say like map view, for example, I can directly go to the map view class. So it's very handy. The SDK also has a lot of guides. We are working on reorganizing them. So there is a lot here working with the API. So it covers a lot of new topics. especially when you are moving from 3 to 4. There is a lot to learn here. And then in the end, there is migrating from 3x a section with like a choose a version. Julie will talk a little bit more about it. And then migrating, so choosing a version, like depending on what you are trying to achieve, should you still use 3x or move to 4? Migrating from 3x to 4.3. Like Lloyd was showing in 3, there is also the release notes for 4. So it's a little bit, the look is a little bit different, but it's kind of the same. So we have like all the different latest enhancements that some of them I will talk about. So this is for 4.3. We have also all the previous ones. And then we did a lot of work also to link like a property that you can find in a class to the appropriate samples. So same samples here if I'm looking for, I don't know, unique value renderer, for example, I start to type unique for unique value, and then I have all the samples that are related. I can explore it in a sandbox or directly, for example, open the code into Jsbin. Yeah, it works. And then can make any kind of modification, and then hit Control S, and it will persist it will save the changes, and then I can try to do that quickly. Like if I change the background color to white here, it reloads the app. So I don't see anything on my legend, but that's the point here. And then I just updated the URL. So now if I share this link, I should get what I was looking at. Anyway, when it works, it works. Okay, and then we have a link to the GeoNet page. Okay. So first, So Lloyd already talked about the vector tile support. So we basically have redone the entire layer how it's drawing for 4.2. It's a faster implementation compared to the previous one, and then we support natively what we call index tiles. So if you cook your own vector tiles, and then you have areas that are very not very dense in the number of features, then we will maybe cook less tiles in this area. Like let's say in the middle of ocean here, there is not so much features, so we don't need to cook more tiles. But then in the region of LA, for example, we continue subdividing. So we keep, the benefit there is that we download less tiles to the client, so it's pretty cool. Yeah, we improve the right to left support, and then also tile boundaries. The previous before, like some of the labels were cut at the tile boundaries, so this is fixed. We support IE11 and Edge, and then also we added support for vector tiles in 3D. So you can bring your vector tile layer to end style, so to the 3D scene. 3D scene, yeah.
Projections.
Oh yeah. Yeah, so Julie reminded me we added also, we have also support for any projection. So if you, any projection. Not just Web Mercator. All right. Next, so the map image layer in 4X, we completely revamped the API of the ArcGIS dynamic map service layer that you can see in 3X. So it's a brand new API that is much more simpler, so that you can take advantage of all the unique and powerful capabilities of that layer. So this layer consumes a map service that you create, and then in that map service you have many sublayers. And then what we did is to make easier to modify the different properties of those sublayers, like the renderer, labeling. If you are using dynamic workspaces, it's much simpler now. So I have 3 examples about that. Do you see fine at the back the fonts, or is it? Yeah, okay. So so in this application, I have a map image layer, and it's not the default rendering. What I've done is I've created a class break renderer. Well, actually, a suite of class break renderers. So I can switch between them, and it's exactly the same service. So here I have the list of the different class breaks that I have created. But then what is interesting here is that I create my map image layer with a URL to the service, and then I specify the sublayers, which is like kind of a layer. It has some of the same properties, but yeah, I can specify what is the renderer, and automatically the layer will refresh when I specify a different one. I can also change the if it's visible, and the labeling also. So this one has a labeling. If I zoom close enough, that will appear after a certain during depending on the scale. The other one is also about labeling. So this is another example. All the examples I'm showing are available in the SDK. So so I just put them in on Jsbin. But this is the same principle here. I'm mapping the different city names. If I go look at the source, I don't know what Jsbin is doing today, but yeah. Hello. Okay. That's all right. That's all right. So these layers, this map image layer also works perfectly fine in 3D. So yeah. Okay, I'm lost. Okay. Oh my. Yeah. Okay. So this sample is about a dynamic workspace. So for those who don't know what is a dynamic workspace, I didn't really know before we implemented that. You can define on a map image layer the sublayers, and then you can create new sublayers that are not natively on the service, but on your server you have created a dynamic workspace where you have exposed to the server databases and tables. So I can dynamically say to my map image layer, okay, grab the data from this table in my workspace and then render it with this renderer. So here I've created a sublayer with a title. The ID will be 0. So this is how I will reference it in my app. We'll give it an opacity. And then here I'm defining what is the source. So the source is of type data layer, which means it's one of the two types of sources. And then the data source will be a join between two set of data, right? So on the left side, we're going to have the other sublayer with the ID number 3, and then on the right table, on the right side, we're going to have a table coming from this workspace ID. We have a lot of examples about it, but the idea is like I can join basically two tables together. All right. At 10.5, map service 10.5 supports also visual variables, so you can define in your renderers smart mapping renderers, and then they will be honored by the map image layer. So visual variables as well as arcade expressions, so labeling, arcade expressions, all the renderers and so on. All right, 4.3 we added apply edit, so apply edits. That's a typo. So this is another sample from the SDK that I showed this morning. So we have a couple of we have some edits that happen, but the idea here is the first method that we needed for getting started on the editing. So you can add new features, update or delete features, and update attributes. You can update their geometry and so on. Okay. And also this one, so this is about the feature layer on demand mode. So in 4X, we made the choice to not expose the mode In 3x, you can choose snapshot or on-demand or selection. In 4, it's going to be a bit different. We, depending on your data, if it's like way too many points that we cannot draw, we know we won't be able to draw, we won't do a snapshot, we will do on-demand. And then if it's a small data set, we will fetch just one snapshot of all the points and then display them. The on-demand is new at 4.3, so 4.3, I think. And so as I pan around, the feature layer makes more requests to fetch the data that wasn't there before. All right, so Lloyd also talked about arcade. So this is also new. It's new in the platform. It's new in the 3x API. It's new also in 4. So it's exactly the same as in 3x. You can define your own expressions to change the rendering, or actually compute fields, and then after you use a renderer to render that field that was created. For example, in the demo that I showed this morning with all the points at the plenary, I had the number of votes for Democrats and the number of votes for Republicans, and so I was able to process those two values to figure out what was the winner. And then, so that I created a field called majority, which had this value, an arcade expression that was just doing a comparison between the two. And so after I was able to draw either in blue or in red. All right. So on the developer.arcgis.com, you have a link to the JavaScript SDK and the Web Map Specification, for example, but there is also a complete SDK for arcade, which has like guides and also function reference. So it's a full language with native functions. So yeah, Christian will talk about it lengthily during the Dev Summit. All right. Some of the new 3D capabilities. So a lot happened since 4.0. Recently, we released the integrated mesh layer and point cloud layers. So both layers are like taking points, lots of points, and then the integrated mesh rebuilds like a mesh from the LiDAR data. So integrated mesh like combines the elevation as well as imagery and like all the different features. Whoa, I don't know where I'm at there. So this was made by a partner, Vercon, and then this is Yosemite. So the advantage of this integrated mesh is that you have much more detail than the default elevation. So here you can spot the different trees, but in a city you would see more details on buildings. It's really cool also because you can fly your own drone and then integrate that with the software that is called Drone to Map. Sorry, and then Drone to Map can create those integrated mesh too. Yes, thank you. All right. Point cloud layer. So same. So these are points, LiDAR points, and then it works kind of like a feature layer. It has a renderer, and then you can apply different types of renderer. They are specific renderers. In the SDK, they are listed next to unique value renderer and class breaks. These are all like point cloud, unique value renderer, point cloud, etc., etc. So this one is an RGB value, but then after I can switch to this one is last classification, elevation map, and then intensity of values. I'm not very familiar with the subject. There are some sessions during the week about deploying, like getting those kind of data and pushing them to the platform. New APIs, one of the new one is the elevation, query elevation. So if you have a point and then you want to ask for, one last improvement in 4.3, we added new options to the point class renderers to control, for example, the size of the dots and then the density of dots. I want to crash my browser here, but yeah, so dot per inch, and then I can make them bigger if I want to. So Elevation API is new at 4.2, I think. It's very nice. Like if you want to get the elevation directly from the tiles that are displayed. So here we have a custom elevation service. So we have the elevation service, the world elevation service, and then there is a custom elevation service that that is showing landslides, and the two elevations are combined together. Now I want to know what was the elevation before the landslides and what is the elevation after the landslide. So when I click the elevation layer is queried. So we query both the before elevation, before the landslide and after the landslide, and then just with just a map point. And then we get the two results, and I'm able to like compute, for example, the elevation difference at that point. You can pass a different wide range of geometries, and then you can, like, for example, have all the points along a line, for example. JC built some, added some. We already have that in 2D, but in 3D now we can customize what is the different go-to options. So if you want to go slower to a location or faster, like this, and then also you can create custom. Whoop, it's not working. This one is wrong.
It is?
Okay, this one was supposed to bounce to Berlin, but okay. I modified the code and I messed it up. But that's the idea. Is like you can pass a customizing function and to customize a little bit the animation. All right. Up. So this is one of the latest samples so this is 4.3. You can now specify the definition expression on the scene layer, like on the feature layer. So in this sample, it goes over, like I can show either all the floors of the building Q in the campus of Redlands, or I can show the first floor, second floor, third floor. This is working using definition expressions. Yep, that's one thing. Query. So now we can also query features. Sorry, this was on this sample too. So it's using also query features on the scene layer. Like the feature layer, you can query features. So here it's like querying wherever I click. This one is useful to query for the building. Like if I want to have the extent of a building, to be able to zoom to that building when I click on it. So it's a bit different than in 2D. In 2D, when you have an extent, the extent here of this building would be its footprint. It would be the extent around its footprint. So you would look a little bit down. This new capability, you get the actual bounding box of a particular building. So you can actually like frame it correctly on the screen and get also some information on the right. Right. Web style symbols. So Esri purchased a lot of 3D symbology, like cars and like other stuff I will show you. And then we developed a playground to explore all the different symbols. Oh, sorry, I'm going too fast. All right. We developed a playground to explore the different symbology, so 2D and 3D symbology. It's in the SDK. It's one of the samples. So here, like you have the list of all the different symbols that we support in the API. You can go through them, and then let's say picture marker symbol. Well, that's a bad example.
Web styles.
Yeah, web style. So if I look, for example, for web style, it's only available in 3D. I can choose one of the style name, like if I want to have thematic signs and signal style, and then choose a name. So for example, a phone. Where is my phone here? All right. So this is really easy to use. You can you just create a web style symbol, specify what is the style name, and all the different style names are documented in the SDK, and then the portal where all those models are hosted. Then you can quickly copy the code to the clipboard and paste it into your app. See a usage example, get the JSON. So this is the actual JSON if you are saving that, and so on. Yeah, and you have like cars, different car model makes also, and that's nice. And finally, smart mapping. So smart mapping was released with the scene viewer. Not this release, but the previous release, yeah, December release of ArcGIS Online. So for that, we developed, we optimized the code to render renderers with visual variables. What is really nice is that the user now can just like, use the sliders and have he can have a very responsive user experience. So that's pretty nice. All right, and okay, so we are building editing. It takes time, but we've released feature layer apply edits. We have also worked on the event management. It's a bit different than in 3x. In 3x, so you can listen for click events, double click event, and so on. But then you have to call, if you want to create your own drawing experience, you need to disable everything else in your application to make sure nothing interfere with your editing. We have changed that in 4. We have created something called the input manager, and it is the manager that manages all the events inside the map view or scene view. But the idea is that you can listen for an event and then stop its propagation. So let's say by default, if you click on a feature, the map view will display a pop-up over that feature. If you want to stop that behavior, you can just listen for the click event and stop its propagation. So here, by default, the map view would pan as as I drag on the map. But then if I intersect that event, I can I just prevent the default action from happening, and then I can do my own thing. So here it's drawing a buffer around the point I'm dragging over. And the code to show that, to do that, that's pretty simple. So we have a set of new events on drag, for example. And so I get an event with the screen point, and then I can just stop its propagation, and then the map will just not pan. All right, so that's an overview of the different things. Okay. All right, it's going to be Julie now. Julie will cover also some of the new things that we have added to the API. Okay,
we want to leave time for questions too, so I'll try and fly through some of this stuff. Okay, so the teams worked really hard on basically putting tools in the API to help you build a great user experience. And I'm just going to go through some of these examples. One of the things is positioning, relative positioning of all of your UI controls widgets, and then also padding of the map. So let me just show you what I mean by that. Let's see, where's my... So in this example, very, very simple example, but it just shows so basically how you can basically set up UI padding. So if I want to have my controls always to the, you can just say top left, top right, and then define whether you want a padding or not. So 0 padding, 20 pixels, 40 pixels. So basically make it easy for you to place your widgets. And then if you use relative padding, that's pretty nice, because if you have to deal with different resolutions, you always know that you're basically going to have your widgets move around correctly. The view padding, this is something that's easier seen as you kind of change the window size. So as I kind of make it smaller, you see that the map, this little island, stays in the center of the map. And that's because you can basically offset where you want the center of the map to be. A lot of times here at Esri, we kind of assume that, oh, map's the biggest part of the application, but it isn't always the only part of your app. You have some sort of UI going on next to your application. So you might, oh, you need to turn off your mic.
No, it's done.
Oh, okay. You might want to basically put an offset of where that center of your map should be. I hear feedback.
Yeah, I know. I don't know.
maybe it's, I don't know. Sorry if you guys can't hear me very well. In any case, it's just kind of a nice like placement and updating of the center of the map for your positioning. And then on the widget side, we've got like I don't know, is there 4 sessions just dedicated to customizing, basically using our widgets out of box, styling them, customizing the view.
Whoa.
Not it.
Should I try a different one?
You just hold it, maybe.
Is it better? Like, oh,
Yeah,
maybe it was
it's huge.
my necklace. I'm sorry. So we have a bunch of sessions on widgets, and basically from the least amount of customization, just using them out of box, to styling them, to customizing them, to building your own widget. And back in December, we released the developer or the development pattern for building your own widget. So there's a guide, a step-by-step guide for how you build your own widget. So you can check that out and basically build your widgets in the same pattern as the API widgets. One session you'll want to attend before the building your own widget session is the accessor. What? I thought you were saying no. The accessor session, which basically teaches you how to create something that we use throughout the entire API that basically all the widget pattern builds on. So you should definitely attend that session. I don't know if you want to add anything to that. No. Okay. So I'm just going to take you guys through, since we don't have much time, I'll just go straight to my demos. A couple of the new widgets that we have available. So the layer list is new from 4.3, and this is a cool sample that I actually just discovered in preparing for this session. You can do you can do custom actions. Are you guys familiar with custom actions for the pop-ups in the API? I'll go over that in a second. But basically, you can integrate things you want to be able to do, an action you want to do based on that layer. So in this case, it's just go to full extent, increase opacity, decrease opacity, things like that. So what the code looks like is basically, there's a method that you have to define for returning all your custom actions. And then basically you define like what are the different things you want to be able to do, and then when it's clicked on, you have an ID identifying each one of those different actions and say what you want to do within that action. So basically, this is stuff you could have implemented yourself, but it's just nice hooks within the API to kind of bring in different capabilities into your UI. The same thing goes for pop-ups. So it's not like, in the past, we've seen people basically change the contents within a pop-up and do certain things. Like you want to click on the map and then buffer that point or buffer that feature. You could have done that in the past, but now we just made a nice pattern for you to do it, a nice hook into the API so that you guys can implement that on your own. Since we're talking about pop-ups, maybe I'll just switch over to that one. There's a lot of pop-up examples that we have. So if I click on this particular feature, this is a custom action inside a pop-up. So the layer list custom actions are defined in a method, but this is just simply like a collection. You're saying like, okay, here's all the custom actions I want to add to my pop-up. So when I click on that feature, I want to do something with it. And in this case, we're measuring. So I'm defining the measure this action, and then basically it's going to be calling this measure this function. So it'll measure that line. So it's just kind of a nice way for you to hook into that experience of when the user clicks on one of your features and they want to do something with it. There's a pretty great set of samples for pop-ups from getting started to the dock positions. One of the things that I receive feedback on multiple times is, people want to be able to click on the map, but they don't want the pop-up to cover something, some of the features in the map. So you have the ability to just easily dock it to the left and to the, wherever you want it to be, so you can kind of get out of the way of the map. All of the widgets are responsive, so if you're using like a smaller device, the pop-up will automatically dock to the bottom to kind of make way for the map and have a nice display of the pop-up. I think a lot of us kind of take nice pop-ups for granted, but now seeing just how much nicer the experience is when you have a good pop-up. You see that with the 4X API. Just a few more widgets I wanted to point out. We've had the print widget in the 3X API, but all of the widgets, I think it's a good time to mention that all the widgets we're not just simply throwing them over the fence and bringing them across to 4X. The team's working hard to redesign them, make them responsive. Has that new widget pattern of having basically the business logic separated from the view. So that's kind of like an architectural update to all the widgets, and then also an overall design update. So in the case of the print widget, it used to be a very simple widget to basically expose the export map capability you have for printing. So on the server side, you can design a map layout with any sort of legend and design of your map scale and title elements, and then basically you can print any size high quality map from a web application using these services. That's been around since I think 10.0 or 10.1. But our print widget was fairly simple in the 3X API. With this new print widget, we're just exposing more for you to basically control what that printout's going to look like from the widget itself. It's similar to what the Web App Builder print widget had. It kind of exposed a little bit more of those options. So the team worked to kind of improve the overall print experience, and then you can control more things like the scale, and then you can see your exported files. And so there's just some enhancements there with the print widget. So go back to slides. So that was the layerless print widget. Oh, and don't forget about little me. This is the expand widget that came with 4.3. It's just a real simple widget. Let's see, yeah. So that's this guy, and it's very, very simple, but I think Renee used it like 5 times in each demo. Basically just you want to have like a little button on your UI and easily just be able to expand it and see a full view of your widget. It's a very, very simple implementation. Basically you just pass it the DOM node of what you want to put inside there. So if it's just a base map gallery widget or one of the other API widgets, it's real easy to just throw it in there in the expand widget. Do you want to say, okay. And we already covered pop-ups, I jumped to that. So this is kind of the explanation of what you can do with widgets. There's a whole guide on how you can style them. This is just like looking at how you can actually style all of them using the SAS files. And then this is the widget documentation. So you can go in the API and then see the, if I go to the guide, are we awake? Working with the API and then styling. This is a really great place to start for looking at how you style your UI, and then you can kind of dive deeper into your whole widget development, which is this part. It's kind of a step-by-step guide. So it's really good. If you're interested in this, you should also check out, there's a TypeScript session if you're interested in learning about that in the conference. How much time do we have? Are we out of time?
3:23.
Okay, I'm going to try and go through this really quick. Another really big kind of area of concentration with the API, and actually all of our APIs, is platform integration. So when we think about platform integration, we want full coverage to be able to consume, author, work with all these different platform resources. So we've been working with a web map for quite some time. It's an open spec. Same with the web scene, so like the 3D equivalent of the web map. Arcade, we've been talking about the cross-platform scripting, and then of course the REST API. With the 4X API, we're going to have complete coverage of the REST API, so things that you would have had to write, in some cases, direct code against the portal API, for example, will have coverage like adding an item, eventually web map writing, all of that will be included in the API. You can already write web scenes. As soon as we have full web map support in the 4X API, then we'll have web map writing as well. This is just a real quick walkthrough of some of the benefits of working against web scenes and web maps. We've shown this example with web maps before, but the same sort of thing applies to web scenes. So the API architecture really mirrors the web scene and web map. Before, we had the 3X API, it existed before, web map even existed. So we basically had to write in support for the web map, whereas 4X API was designed with all of that in mind. So it's really a one-to-one design structure-wise between the web map, web scene, and the map object in the API in scene. So just looking at how you'd bring in a web scene, It's just loaded with a single ID, so you can actually bring in that whole 3D experience, even the bookmarks, just by loading that ID. Then this is looking at the web scene viewer, so if I pick up the ID of a different web scene and then load it my map, and then basically that's the only code change I make, and then I have this whole other experience in my application. So it really kind of saves you a lot of time for bringing in, an authoring in an authoring environment like online or ArcGIS Enterprise, so you don't have to do all your authoring in code. You're basically authoring in that nice environment and then keeping your code very simple to bring it into your app. Layer items are a little less known, I think, because we're always talking about web scenes and web maps. But I think the beautiful thing about layer items is it takes all the good things from, well, not all good things, a lot of the good things about web maps and web scenes, meaning you can go in online or enterprise, author your layer, do all your styling, do all your pop-ups, any sort of filtering, whatever you want to do on that layer. You save the layer, and then you load the layer into your map. Now the difference is the web scene and web map contains everything that would be in your map, your base maps, all the different layers, whereas your layers are, smaller granularities. You can like pull in the layers you want into your different applications, which is really great because you could style them once. Maybe you work with a cartography team that does really great styling. You can have consistent styling of your layers, and then your developers just pull in the layers when they need them. We use that all the time. So just looking at that same sort of code for a layer, basically you load that layer item, same thing, an ID, and then now this is a different layer. I'm looking at it in the map viewer, so I copy that ID for that layer item, and then now you can see it replaced. So you can see the base map didn't come across, it's just that one layer that I want to add to my map. Sorry, I just flew through that stuff, but I did want to cover one more thing in 1 minute. Well, we have 3 minutes. That's 2 minutes for questions, 1 minute for this. I think it's helpful to look at our year in a horizontal way so you can kind of see how requirements get into the API. So only look at the 3x API. Basically, what we're doing with 3x is we are supporting platform-wide things we want to have. So OGC support, we want to have really solid OGC support. So you can see that we're working on different OGC enhancements with WMS, WCS. Those are kind of the updates that we have for OGC. Then we have really great vector tile support. That went into 3x and 4x because throughout the platform we want to have really solid vector tiles. So we have the platform-wide capabilities coming to 3x, and then we also have things that Lloyd showed. Basically, when we enhance the online experience, enterprise experience, with capabilities like an improved feature table, smart mapping controls, those also become part of the API. And online experience is built on the JavaScript API. So basically, you kind of see that online experience improving, that's just part of the JavaScript API. So that's really, seeing the year in review on 3x, you can kind of guess what's going to happen in this next year. We're going to be continuing platform-wide initiatives like Arcade throughout both versions of the API, improving the online experience, adding new capabilities that will go into 3x. There's not huge new innovation going to 3x like 3D. It's not going to come to 3x. Web map writing won't come to 3x. We're really just trying to continue the platform development and key bug fixes in 3x, where our primary innovation goes into the 4x API. So I think it kind of helps to look at it in this way. On the 4x side, we're really just trying to get parity with 3x, and again, everything's being redesigned from an architecture perspective, from a design perspective. Yann puts like crazy attention to detail for a lot of the stuff that he redesigns for the API. So it's reaching parity, but with a really great design, and then bringing in that new innovation like 3D. So we have 4 releases this year of both versions of the API. Okay, I just want to cut it off there so you guys have time to ask any questions you have. Please take our survey as well. I mean, I read every single comment for all of the web sessions, so all of your feedback, positive and negative, we really take into account for into the following year. Okay, questions, right here in the middle. I'm sorry, I can't hear. Which session is about widgets?
Did you recommend?
Oh, let me show. I have the perfect answer for that. Can we take another question while I pull up that answer?
Okay, so the question is about when is the measurement widget coming in. So we are, sorry? Yeah, we are still building like some of the pieces that we need before, like drawing. We started working on that, but I can't say exactly which release, if it's gonna be this one, the next one, or the one after.
Probably after, definitely not the UC release. We're looking at after UC.
Yeah. And then once we get that one, it should be pretty straightforward to get the measurement widget.
So the previous question, it's up here on the screen. I published a blog for all the sessions about web development, and I highly recommend you check it out. At the end, it has printable guides, PDFs that you can just see all the different categorized sessions, and there's a series of sessions that covers all about building your UI. So the general one, and then as I mentioned, customizing to, here's the access one that I mentioned, and then building your own widget. This last one is just kind of looking into exactly how we built some of these widgets, like layer list. That kind of helps from a practical perspective, looking at that code. Oh, one thing I forgot to show is we have all of the widget views shared on GitHub, so you can see how we've implemented the widget view and write your own. Yeah, Robert.
Yeah, so the question is about, so the map view and scene view have a function called itTest that is the one you use to get what feature you have just touched. We are still building the piece. So the question is, when do we return all the features? We are still working on some of the pieces there. I don't know when, but I want to be able to do that, like giving a point, getting either the features that are already downloaded on the client, or making a query on the service. It's something we are looking at. We are actually designing some of those APIs after the Dev Summit, because we have more people of the team here. I can't say when though. I don't know. Yeah. So the question is about support of snapping and using also the geometry engine. So yeah, we are still designing and implementing the draw tools. This will come after. For now, we are not yet looking at it. Yeah.
We're hoping to have our first release of the draw tools at UC.
She said that, not me.
I said the word hoping too.
Any other question?
Okay, hope you guys have a really good Dev Summit.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Have fun.